So this is going to be a really exciting video today. I had so much fun diving into the ancient Grecian history, looking at a couple of different societies and governments. I absolutely love ancient Grecian history. I have not delved into it as much as I want to. Next quarter, I'm actually taking a classics course on the invention of democracy. So there's a part of me that wishes I could do this video after I take that course, but I know that I couldn't make you guys wait that long for this video. So we're gonna dive in and I'm just gonna get like an easy A in that class. Hopefully. Nothing's been an easy A so far, but let's just get right into it. All right, so today we are looking at Federalist number 18. This is the same subject, continue the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union. The next two papers after this will wrap up this little mini series within the Federalist papers, and it's all going to be history based. So I really love this part of it. I think these papers were a lot of fun to read. This one was written by James Madison with Alexander Hamilton, and it was published December 7th, 1787. Again, they're just like cranking these babies out. And like I said, in this paper, we see a really interesting detailing of ancient Grecian history. And they use this to show what happens if you have a weak central government. So remember that the main argument that the Federalists are opposing is the argument that the central federal government will be too strong under the new Constitution. And the Federalists are arguing that in order for the federal government to be able to do its job and fulfill its promise of protection to all of its members, it needs more power. So that is their central argument again here. So Madison and Hamilton, they're geniuses. They were absolute geniuses for their day, and they really have an opportunity to shine here and show off their extensive knowledge of ancient history. But not only that, we also get to see their interpretation of the politics surrounding the fall of these ancient democracies. And during our reading today, it's their interpretation of the politics that we are going to be most focused on. As always, we will put a little paragraph symbol right down here in the corner so that you can follow along in the paper with me if you would like. If you don't have your own copy, I will leave a link in the description so you can buy it on Amazon and we can be old school together. Or you can read it online for free at the Library of Congress website. They have every single Federalist paper there in its entirety for free for you to read. There's only been a couple of differences I've noticed. There's one in this paper. I'll point it out when we get to it. But you can read it for free there. Otherwise, you can just follow along and enjoy my voice talking about the Federalist paper. You absolutely don't need to have the paper in front of you to understand what I'm talking about. So, as always, please feel free to leave your thoughts and comments and interpretations, or if you think I got something wrong or I just misunderstood something. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you've got some additional context to add to the conversation. That's what this book club is all about. It's about open communication and interpretation together. That's how we learn, that's how we grow, and that's why I'm doing this. So with that, let's just get right into the paper. So he introduces the Grecian republics associated under the Amphictyonic Council. I did a lot of work to look up these words and these ancient Greek words, so I hope that my pronunciation is on point today. I have high hopes. So why is he introducing this particular council or league that existed in the Grecian republics? Well, it bore a very instructive analogy to the present confederation of the American states. How so? Well, like the states under the Articles of Confederation, the members retained the character of independent and sovereign states and had equal votes in the federal council. The role of the council was very similar to that of Congress in that their role was to ensure the safety of all the independent city-states by making decisions about war, by settling controversies between the members, things like that. The biggest difference is, though, that the Amphictyons were the guardians of religion and of the immense riches belonging to the temple of Delphos, where they had the right of jurisdiction in controversies between the inhabitants and those who came to consult the oracle. And there's actually quite a lot of interesting history surrounding this temple. It's referred to as the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, if you're interested in looking it up. And what I found most interesting and just a little bit foreboding is the inscription that's on a column that's just outside the temple. And there's 3 maxims on here that say, know thyself, nothing in excess, surety brings ruin. So they knew what they were doing. So the Amphictyons took an oath mutually to defend and protect the united cities, to punish the violators of this oath, and to inflict vengeance on sacrilegious despoilers of the temple. And keep this last part in mind, as it's going to be really important just a little bit later in the paper. So in theory, this all seemed perfect. And as a matter of fact, the council actually had more power under their rules than did the Articles of Confederation. And this was mainly owing to the fact that the Amphictyons had in their hands the superstition of the times, one of the principal engines by which government was then maintained. For instance, going back to the Temple of Delphi for a moment, they would take political documents to the temple because, according to classics professor Susan Cole, doing so intended to consecrate the political text and demonstrate these Greek laws derived from the Apollo's authority. So any of the members that decided not to follow the rules, they were not just disobeying the government. They were disobeying the laws that were consecrated by the gods. And the Amphictyons were bound by an oath to exert this authority on the necessary occasions. So this is a very strong system that they have in place to ensure that everybody follows the rules, right? Very different, nevertheless, was the experiment from the theory. The powers, like those of the present Congress, were administered by deputies appointed wholly by the cities in their political capacities and exercised over them in the same capacities. And this is what Madison and Hamilton attribute to their final destruction. Because what ended up happening was that the stronger members would end up dominating and tyrannizing the smaller, weaker members. Athens dominated Greece for 73 years, then the Lacedaemonians controlled Greece for another 29 years, and then it was the Thebans' turn and they ruled Greece. So there definitely wasn't any balance of power between the strong members and the weak members, which is exactly the arguments that the Federalists asserted in previous papers, namely Federalists 6, 7, and 8. It happened, but too often, according to Plutarch. So Plutarch was not only a philosopher and a historian in Greek at the time, but he was also a priest at the Temple of Apollo, so he would definitely know that the deputies of the strongest cities awed and corrupted those of the weaker, and that judgment went in favor of the most powerful party. So the judgment didn't go to who was right according to the rules of the Confederation. It went according to who was most powerful. And so now we're going to see an example of what happens. Even in the midst of defensive and dangerous wars with Persia and Macedon, the members never acted in concert and were more or fewer of them eternally the dupes or the hirelings of the common enemy. And this assertion is familiar if you've read John Jay's Federalist Papers, numbers 4 and 5, called Concerning Dangers from Foreign Force and Influence. So Xerxes, who I have heard a lot about living with a Persian husband, attempted to invade Greece in the 5th century BC, but he was ultimately defeated by the Greeks. So yay, success, right? Well, the Lacedaemonians said that there were some city-states that were not faithful to the Confederacy during this debacle. And they said that these city-states should be kicked out of the Confederation. But the Athenians, they were like, they're not losing very much support, and we know that if we were to say something like that, if we were to suggest that we need to kick out some city-states, we would lose a ton of support. So they responded, and they made sure that the Lacedaemonians would lose support by becoming masters of public deliberations, and they vigorously opposed and defeated the attempt. This piece of history proves at once the inefficiency of the Union, the ambition and jealousy of its most powerful members, and the dependent and degraded condition of the rest. Because while the smaller and less powerful members were supposed to have equal representation in their union, they had in fact become satellites of the orbs of primary magnitude. And according to Abbé Milot, who was like a 17th century French philosopher guy, if the Greeks had been wise, if they were smart, they would have learned from these lessons and they would have made some reforms following their defeat of Xerxes. But Athens and Sparta had very different ideas because they were the two strongest city-states at the time. They, inflated with the victories and the glory they had acquired, become first rivals and then enemies. And they did each other infinitely more mischief than they had suffered from Xerxes. This eventually led to the Peloponnesian War that Athens started and then lost and became enslaved, so didn't really work out for them. So now the Greeks are no longer at war with any outside forces. But of course, in peacetime, they find many reasons to bicker amongst each other. So apparently what happened was the Phocians, they dug up some consecrated land belonging to the Temple of Apollo, aka the same Temple of Delphi that's referred to in the very beginning of the paper. And the Amphictyonic Council was like, oh, no, we can't have this. We need to make sure that something's done about this. Because remember the part that I told you to remember at the beginning of the paper, the Amphictyonic Council's responsibility was to inflict vengeance on sacrilegious despoilers of the temple. So they responded by imposing a fine on the Phocians. But there was just one tiny problem with that. They were not going to pay, and they didn't have to pay. You know why? They were backed by Athens and Sparta. They were supported by them, and these were the two strongest city-states. So the Thebans, they got together with the other cities because they wanted to make sure that the Phocians paid their debts. The way that they put it is that they're going to maintain the authority of the Amphictyons and they're going to avenge the violated gods. But they needed some help. So they hit up Philip of Macedon. Macedon was not a part of the Amphictyonic Council at this time, but unbeknownst to them, Philip had orchestrated the whole thing. By his intrigues and bribes, he won over to his interests the popular leaders of several cities. By their influence and votes, gained admission into the Amphictyonic Council, and by his arts and his arms, made himself master of the confederacy. So it's safe to say that this Amphictyonic Council was just a little too easy to penetrate. Had Greece, says a judicious observer on her fate, been united by a stricter confederation and preserved in her union, she would never have worn the chains of Macedon, and might have proved a barrier to the vast projects of Rome. Which leads us into our second and final example in this paper, the Achaean League. This league's a hell of a lot better than the last one. The union here was far more intimate and its organization much wiser than in the preceding instance. And they say that it absolutely did not deserve the catastrophe that eventually befell it. The cities composing this league retained their municipal jurisdiction, appointed their own officers, and enjoyed a perfect equality. The Senate, in which they were represented, had the sole and exclusive right of peace and war, of sending and receiving ambassadors, of entering into treaties and alliances, of appointing a chief magistrate or praetor, as he was called, who commanded their armies and who, with the advice and consent of 10 of the senators, not only administered the government in the recess of the Senate, but had a great share in its deliberations when assembled. According to the primitive constitution, there were 2 praetors associated in the administration, but on trial, a single one was preferred. So all's going well. There's continuity in their laws and their customs. They use the same currency, but whether or not that was due to the authority of the federal council, it's up for debate. So all's going well. There's continuity in their laws and their customs. They're using the same currency, but whether or not this is because of the authority of the federal council, it's kind of up for debate. It's a little uncertain. But it is said only that the cities were in a manner compelled to receive the same laws and usages. So for instance, the Lacedaemonians, who were previously members of the Amphictyonic Council, they were forced to abolish their own institution and laws when they joined the Achaean League, and they had to adopt the rules and the laws of the Achaeans. They were not forced to do this when they were members of the Amphictyonic Council. And this circumstance alone proves a very material difference in the genius of the two systems. Unfortunately, only imperfect monuments remain of this curious political fabric. So we couldn't learn as much as we would like to from the Achaean League because the Federalists believed, could its interior structure and regular operation be ascertained, it is probable that more light would be thrown by it on the science of federal government than any of the other examples that we do have access to. The League was finally defeated by the Romans, which effectively ended the independence of ancient Greece. But what's important to note is the reason that Rome and the Achaeans went to war in the first place was because the Romans were punishing them for considering an alliance with the Macedonians. And Madison and Hamilton, they're saying here that their dissolution was due to the arts of Macedon, meaning they're meddling in their politics. So they're attributing the Achaeans' downfall to meddling from this nearby neighbor. And I'll put up a map right here so that you can kind of see that they're close, they're nearby, right? But before this happened in the Achaean League, there was infinitely more of moderation and justice in the administration of its government and less of violence and sedition in the people than were to be found in any of the cities exercising singly all the prerogatives of sovereignty. Abbé Mably, another French philosopher guy, says that the popular government, which was so tempestuous elsewhere, caused no disorders in the members of the Achaean Republic, because it was there tempered by the general authority and laws of the Confederacy. And so this is really the central argument that the Federalists are making. The federal government needs authority because the results speak for themselves. They are not attributing the downfall of the Achaeans to their weak central government the way that they did with the Amphictyons. Their downfall was due to outside meddling because these were very small and weak city-states, comparatively speaking. But obviously, we can't totally say that the Achaeans were not plagued by factions as discussed in Federalist 9 and 10, because the contrary is sufficiently displayed in the vicissitudes and fate of the Republic. They're not around anymore. But what's interesting is that the Amphictyonic Council, the League, they outlived the Achaeans, even though the Federalists asserted that they had a worse government or a lesser government. And like I said, this was mainly due to the fact that the Achaeans were composed of the less important cities. When the former, the Amphictyons, became a victim to Macedon, the latter, the Achaeans, was spared by the policy of Philip and Alexander. Alexander is Philip's son, so when Philip was assassinated, his son Alexander came in and carried on his legacy. Under their successors, though, it was a very different story. The various cities ended up being seduced by varying interests from outside forces, and eventually the union was dissolved. It was an absolute mess for them. But, and this is probably my favorite line in this entire paper, shame and oppression ere long awakened their love of liberty. So some of the cities started to reunite and they were able to cut off their tyrants. And then other cities were taking example from them and they started to reunite. So it looked like everything was going well. The League soon embraced almost the whole of Peloponnesus. And Macedon was powerless to stop it at this point because they had internal dissensions, they had their own stuff going on. So everything was looking really great for united Greece. But let us not forget our friends Sparta and Athens. So the League, they tried to start an alliance with the kings of Egypt and Syria because they had a common enemy in the Macedons. They were successors of Alexander, so it was just automatic. Because they were worried that the Macedons would eventually launch an attack on them. But it didn't end up working out because the king of Sparta, Cleomenes, sabotaged the whole thing. And the reason he did it is because he wanted control of the Achaean cities. He was planning to launch an unprovoked attack on his neighbors, just out of his pure ambition. He just wanted to control these cities. Well, he was also an enemy of the Macedonians. And he had a lot more pull with Egypt and Syria because he was controlling a much bigger city-state. So when he goes to the kings of Egypt and Syria and he offers an alliance with them and tells them to break off their engagement with the Achaeans, who do you think that they want to listen to? Do they want to side with the big guy or the little guys? So right here, we are on paragraph 19 according to the Library of Congress website, but in my particular edition, 18 and 19 are all one big paragraph. So I'm going to say it's paragraph 19 because that's what's on Library of Congress website, but if your book is all one big paragraph, that's my experience too. So back to the story. The Achaeans are in a pretty shitty position at this point because they either have to submit to Cleomenes or they have to get aid from their former oppressors, the Macedons. Those are their only two options. They end up deciding on the latter option, so they get aid from the Macedons. They ask them for help. And what do you think the Macedons said? Of course we'll help you, because the contest of the Greeks always afforded a pleasing opportunity to that powerful neighbor of intermeddling in their affairs. It gave them an open door to come right in and have their take. A Macedonian army quickly appeared, Cleomenes was vanquished, and the Achaeans, unfortunately, soon experienced, as often happens, that a victorious and powerful ally is but another name for a master. So what ended up happening was that Philip is now on the throne of Macedon. And he's being his old tyrannical self because he could. And the Achaeans, in an effort to stand in opposition to him, once more had recourse to the danger expedient of introducing the succor of foreign arms. They still did not have the power to oppose him on their own, so they needed to reach out to foreign powers for help. And who do you think they asked for help? The Romans, who of course eagerly embraced the invitation. So Philip, he ended up getting conquered. Dissension ended up breaking out in the league. And do you think that the Romans wanted to help them work things out? Of course not. This was the opportunity that they were waiting for. This is the reason that they said yes to helping them when they wanted to conquer Philip. But being their smart little political selves, they were saying some really smart things to get people on their side. They were already proclaiming universal liberty throughout Greece, and they were seducing the members from the league. So they were just playing their political games. By these arts, this union, the last hope of Greece, the last hope of ancient liberty, was torn to pieces, and such imbecility and distraction introduced that the arms of Rome found a little difficulty in completing the ruin which their arts had commenced. The Achaeans were cut to pieces, and Achaea loaded with chains, under which it is groaning at this hour. And so the reason that Madison and Hamilton found it really important to outline these particular histories is because it emphatically illustrates the tendency of federal bodies rather to anarchy among the members than to tyranny in the head. In other words, we should be more concerned with managing our members and keeping our members together than we should about the threat of a tyrannical monarch-like figurehead. In summary, Madison and Hamilton showed us two examples of ancient Grecian leagues, confederacies. The Amphictyons, who were composed of some very strong city-states but had a very weak centralized government, and the Achaeans, that had a very strong centralized government but unfortunately was composed of the lesser city-states in the area. They used the Amphictyons to illustrate how the downfall of a powerful and strong union in terms of the city-states it's composed of will be more likely to come from the weak central government. And they use the Achaeans to illustrate how a well-formed central government isn't enough. if its members are weak, but also to show that their downfall came more so from foreign powers meddling in their affairs, not necessarily from a tyrannical monarch-like figurehead from within their own union. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this paper. I would say that this is probably one of the most fun ones I got to research. It took a lot of time, a lot of effort looking into everything, but it was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it as well, please be sure to like the video because it does help other people to find this series. And if you enjoy listening to me talk about things that I'm passionate about, which is pretty much books, then please subscribe to the channel. Not only do I do Federalist papers, but I also like to talk about the other books that I'm reading, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, all of the above. I will also leave a link to my socials down below. I've got Instagram, I've got Twitter. I love to communicate with you guys on there. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Bye!